I get home last night and the front of our house is a little enclave. I've got orchids and all my flowers that I can look at. I'm looking at it right now. And I've got a tree stump that when we cut a tree down, I kept the stump and I put, a pound of bird seed on it every day. So I have squirrels and chipmunks and 20 kinds of birds. And it's like your front yard is my little backyard. And there's a neighbor cat who's discovered that if she sits very quietly, she might catch a bird. And we came home late last night and there was a scurrying, what was it? She has decided to sleep in our yard now. I don't know where she lives. She lives somewhere because she's well fed. And Kimberly's like, well, we had to feed her. Maybe she hasn't eaten. And so I put 2 bowls of food out there. And I checked them this morning, completely empty. So I'm going to circulate a picture and say, someone likes our house better than their own house. How are you, my friend?
I am doing extremely well. Interesting. You're speaking of visiting animals. This is a time of year where we have visiting elk and deer and
is it a migratory path?
Well, it's migratory and all the elk. It's the beginning of rutting season for elk. I don't know if you've heard of the elk bugling. Have you ever heard that?
Yes, I have. I have up in Canada.
Yeah. So just this area and just west of us is the biggest elk herd in North America.
Wow.
So
I want that as my ringtone.
That's not a bad idea. I'll tell you what, I will one of these times because there's 4 or 5 huge bulls that circulate through here, and they bugle and they bugle to each other.
Right.
So I will record that one time. And then last night, I don't know if you've ever heard fox at night, but when they call, they scream. It sounds like a woman screaming bloody murder.
Oh my gosh.
And so we had a couple 3 foxes circulating around. And then there's some bird that we don't know who he or she is that flies around and talks at night. It's really interesting.
Kidding.
So yeah, it's been it's fall where animals are getting ready for winter here.
Wow. I love how seasonal your life is.
Yeah, that would be true. And I actually love that too. I will admit, around the end of February or 1st of March, I'm ready for spring to come a little sooner than it usually comes. But I just have been. I think we started last year. I think we'll be planning a annual trip to Santa Barbara to ease the summer.
That's right. And I think in just not even a couple of weeks, in 8 or 9 days, it will be the fall equinox, and we'll have the change into autumn.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You talk about change in that way. It's from the fall equinox to the winter solstice is each day where it gets darker and we have less and less sunlight. It actually really affects what happens here because when we have less than 12 hours of daylight during the day, it really affects what we do and how we do it and what happens with the horses and when we feed and so much of what happens is in the dark. So it's interesting.
So that's interesting in that you feed the animals at a certain time of day, and which becomes dark. So when you go up at night or in the morning, it's dark. It's curious to me why we feed them according to our clock rather than the circadian rhythm of
Oh,
the
well,
sun.
actually, that's a really good question. Horses in particular, um, horses do not distinguish between day and night. They live exactly the same, whether it's midnight or whether it's daylight. They don't necessarily sleep at night like we do.
Ah,
Um, the um, so what and horses are grazing animals. So in the wild they will eat. They'll eat for 2 or 3 hours grazing, and they'll rest, and they'll eat for 2 or 3 hours grazing. But they go 24 hours a day doing that pattern.
so they eat in the middle of the night?
Yeah, like and there's a word for it. But I never remember the word where an animal doesn't distinguish between day and night.
Interesting.
And they can, what's interesting is I've been out riding in the dark, and horses can see extremely well in the dark. Where we're going, okay, I can't see anything, and they see super well. So what we try to do, we feed 3 times a day. So what we're trying to do is spread it out to make it as close to what they would naturally be doing as possible.
I want to go back to what we talked about with change, because thinking about seasons reminds me of someone who talked about our life being in seasons. The spring of our life, the summer of our life, the fall of our life, and the winter of our life, and what seasons we're in. I'm pretty sure with all this white hair, I'm in winter.
Yes. Actually, we do a whole thing when we teach development. We teach a a cycle based on the directions with
the compass directions. Tell me about that.
Well, with between north and east is beginning, and east is young, beginning, early life, spring, that kind of process. And what's really interesting about that is that life actually begins in the north in seedlings, where we think that spring is the time that everything comes up, but which is true. But many of the seeds actually germinate in the winter, into spring, so that they're ready to come up. And so spring is like childhood, new, that sort of freshness. And then like moving in from east down to south is moving into adolescence and early adulthood. Moving from south to west is mature adulthood, and would sort of coincide with our 50s and 60s. And then from west up to north is eldership, and we tend to flow in that direction. I mean, sometimes we can be an eldership but behave as if we're in the spring.
Sure.
But but in many indigenous cultures, that's seen as the cycle of life. And so when we teach development, because I do have a whole developmental model, we actually overlay my model onto that so that people can see that.
So I would love to talk about change.
Yeah.
And
and like what creates change?
well, there's there's a lot to change. There's a lot of ways into into that conversation. One of the things that has always, it not always interested me, it started interesting me when I started hanging around tech people. So in my 30s, when I was 30, I started Wavefront, and I did that for 20 years. So until I was, until I was 50. And so I'm around very innovative, very progressive, very smart, just awesome people, right? Brilliant, brilliant people. Yet they did not suffer change very well at all. Yet we were the harbingers of change. We were changing how motion pictures were made, how games were designed, how products were visualized. And it was profound change. That's, it changed everything in terms of visualization and those kinds of things. And so we were forcing, not forcing, but we were
instigating.
Yeah, yeah. Inside industries, whole entire industries. And technical people, I found, are extremely resistant to change. And I saw it through that lens, but it dawned on me once I pulled back a little bit. We're all resistant to change. Why is that, Doc?
I think I just got set up.
Volley set match.
That's perfect.
It's my job.
So in one sentence or a couple of sentences, change involves the process of grieving what we're moving from while we're moving towards something else.
Oh.
So if I'm changing a habit, or I'm doing something, or and I do want to talk about habits a bit here, but so for instance, one of the things that I'm in the middle of is changing from seeing individual clients to much more teaching and online classes and supervision and stuff like that. But seeing clients for years has been my bread and butter. It's been very predictable. I know how many clients I have. If a client ends up moving or finishing up with me, I know that there's more in the wings, and there's a security in that. In moving into
my world,
another world is it's like there's excitement in the move, but there's also a bit of insecurity. And part of what I really realized was that I actually need to grieve that process, because I have so enjoyed seeing clients and clearly enjoyed the predictability of my vocation, but it's like, oh, I need to grieve the loss of that. I need to, and in some ways, grieve the security of that. And many times when we change, even if it's for the better, we are letting go of something. And even if it's a choice of letting go of something, I mean, even when people are in relationships and it's not a good relationship and they're leaving it, there's still a grief process in there. And many people don't like the idea of having to grieve.
So I'm going to see if I can help try to understand this a little bit, because you've introduced this idea that is a little incongruous for myself. So I'm thinking of, changing from good to better. There's a change
Mm-hmm.
from good to better. And what you're suggesting is there's a grief over the loss of the good as I go to the better. And so, we've talked about conscious and unconscious competence. So is this unconscious grieving towards conscious grieving so that you can get through that quicker? Because you've helped me through some grief in family loss, and the more I faced that head on, the quicker I got through that. And I built some scar tissue around that, right? I think something that worked. Is there okay, let me try to say this better. If grief exists, if I acknowledge that, am I better off, or am I going to unconsciously grieve anyway, and that's going to rear its head someplace else? That's the question.
No, yeah, I totally get what you're talking about. I would have to think about whether I would call it competence or
conscious or unconscious.
Competence. I think
no. I think I'm using just that same idea that there's right. So am I unconsciously grieving? So my body knows. So my body is going to grieve whether I'm aware of it or not. And that if I make myself aware of it, does that help the transition through the change?
Absolutely. So let me put a little bit different spin on that. I'm totally getting where you're going, and I like how you're saying this. So this is a bit of a metaphor and not metaphor, actually. We have to breathe to live. We do not have a choice about breathing.
Right.
We do have a choice about how we breathe.
Okay.
So we can breathe very shallowly. We can breathe just enough to stay alive. And or we can become aware or consciously competent about how we breathe and work with our breath in a way that is more than staying alive, that actually helps us thrive.
I'm actually when I am conscious of the breath, I am way better served.
Right. And that's the exact same thing that happens with expression of emotion.
Oh.
So just like we will breathe, no matter whether we're conscious about it or not, we will express emotion, whether we're conscious about it or not. So if we're not conscious about it, what tends to happen is that we have an expression of an emotion, and it tends to come out sideways. And so instead of the process perhaps of really grieving a loss, if I don't allow myself to be conscious and aware of it, it'll come out sideways. I may snap at a friend, or I may get frustrated with one of my horses, or I may feel a bit anxious or depressed, or those kinds of feelings. And actually, I do want to circle back around depression and anxiety here in a minute. But we will feel just like we will breathe if we're conscious of the expression of what we feel, which is what you're talking about, is moving into conscious competence around
your emotional state,
around our emotional process, which is there's one of the words for our inner emotional process is interoception. Is if we're conscious of that, then we get to do something with it consciously. It's not running us. We are actually we are actually in tune with that. And there's a word called attunement that actually describes that. So yes, there is a unconscious process or unconscious, and a lot of times it's unconscious incompetence, is that it's like, I don't know what I'm feeling. I'm just feeling lousy today. If we can move that to conscious, even conscious incompetence, and then conscious competence,
Right.
that's extremely helpful to us. And what's also really interesting, and part of the reason I use the example of breath, is that breath actually helps us move that emotional energy through us to help us actually become consciously competent in expression, whether it's grief or whether it's sadness or whether it's love or whether it's.
So is the person who's listening to this right now, because this is a big idea, right? This is one of our bigger ideas, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something for sure we've not talked about before. And I think for me, I associate grief with loss in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And you're suggesting that you can have grief or the loss of something that was positive, where you're moving from positive to positive. You're moving from a lifetime of 80 plus thousand hour direct contact hours of meeting with people to taking the same body of work, but the distribution of it is through groups and talks, and it's completely different. So we're you're scaling your impact by an order of magnitude at least, from the
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one to the one-on-many. And so that's going from good to great, yet there's still a loss. So what do you, a what are the signs of that? Because of all the humans on the planet, you're the one who could probably notice that more. And what could we look for when we're having a change? Like, for instance,
Great
a
question.
change might be from unemployment to employment, negative state to a positive state.
Yeah.
Do I grieve my unemployment?
Well, we might end up grieving is the time that we had, the our ability to do whatever we want to do whenever we wanted to do it, the ability to sleep in, the ability
And
to,
even though that was a negative state, we
yeah,
agree.
yeah,
That's how interesting is that? That's fascinating.
and even, both you and I throughout our lives have been pretty high level athletes
Hmm?
in different arenas that we have played. And, I literally was up there this morning going, it's 40 degrees. It's, climbing up the hill to go feed. And I'm going, and, feeding hay bags, filling hay bags and getting the food ready for my horses. And I'm going, I wonder how many 73-year-olds are doing this
Mm-hmm.
morning. And there's a delight in that, but there's also a grief in that. And part of what I notice is I have a hay storage set up, and like I have to climb up into it. And it's like, oh, I would have climbed up into this a little bit differently 20 years ago. So even though, I'm extremely satisfied with the fact that I can do what I do at 73. And, Kimberly and I are getting ready to go on a week camping trip here starting tomorrow. And I'm also, there's a grief of going, yeah, this is different. And, the same thing with moving into sort of the realm I'm moving into. It's like, oh, well, this is different too. And I've even seen people, and I've worked with people who are totally in love with somebody, and let's say they're planning on getting married, and every fiber of their body wants to marry or move in or be with this other person. And people come and will say, there's this something inside me. It's like I'm totally in love with so and so, but there's this hesitancy. And I ask him, my question is have you grieved the loss of your single life? Because even though somebody wants to be married, even though somebody wants to move in and put together, say, a home and a family, maybe there's I mean, the ability to get up and go out and do certain things that whenever they want to is gone. I mean, the same way with having a child, for instance.
Sure.
It's like let's say a couple's been together 2 or 3 years, and they get pregnant and they're so excited. Their whole world is centered around putting together this family and growing this baby and then ultimately birthing this baby. And it's like, and that's exactly what they want. And their whole life has changed.
Yeah.
And,
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. They can't hang out in bed on the weekends and morning and make love and, go out to breakfast at their favorite breakfast place. It's like, so there's an incredibly wonderful, positive thing happening with bringing a child into the world, and their whole world is that they just left an incredible world.
So if I'm the guy who likes to draw stuff to make sense out of it. So if I'm just draw this line of my life, a lifeline, let's say, and then let's say I just indicate spikes for major changes. It could be divorce, it could be marriage, it could be birth of a child, it could be, in my case, completely changing career from chef to software entrepreneur, from software entrepreneur to sole proprietor of a company with Kimberly and I. So I could see those spikes on my life's path.
It's happening, Mark, but you're freezing.
The internet connection's a little unstable, so that's okay. We will roll with it.
Yeah.
So if I look at those big things, we'll take
work with it.
We'll take minor change off the table, but with these major spikes along my life's path, there is grieving. And I will say, I never consciously grieved any one of those things. I went through like divorces; those are fucked up. But the good ones that happened. How, now that we know that in fact does happen, whether we do anything about it or not, it's going to happen. What can our listener do? What is an active measure they could take now that we've identified this? So now they're going to go, oh. So A, what could they look for? But B, and then B, what could they do?
I think the biggest thing that's a great question. So the biggest thing they need to look for oftentimes is a hesitation in moving forward, even though that's what they want. And that hesitation can be marked by nervousness or fear or a bit of insecurity or some level of depression or anxiety about it. And when people will be feeling that, and they'll be going, I'm doing this thing I've been planning and wanting to do for 10 years. And now I'm all anxious about it, or I'm all, I'm not sure I really want to do it, or I feel insecure about it. And so the biggest piece I think that people can do with that is go, okay, this is a sign that I'm grieving. This is a sign that I'm grieving what I've had, even though the direction I want to go is exactly what I'm doing. And I've been planning it and putting it together for the last 10 years. And why am I now hesitant about it? Or why am I anxious about it? Or why do I wake up in the morning feeling dread?
So now we know why, which is we've all had that feeling.
Yes.
All of us have had that feeling.
And then the
So
next,
yeah. So we all can identify with that. So when the next time that happens, what do we do?
Well, the first piece is to realize that what's really happening is a process of grief.
Right. Right.
And about probably 80% of the time when people do that, they go, oh, and they settle inside. The next step is making time to both grieve and celebrate their loss.
Mm.
And and when I say grieve, I mean feel sad about it, speak about what it is that they lost. It's like, I can go back and go, well, when I was single, I could sleep in. I could get up at 4 a.m. and go for a run if I wanted. If I could, I could go out and hang out with all of my friends anytime I wanted to. I could watch any show on Netflix that I wanted to watch. I didn't have to ask, do you want to watch this too? I mean, all of those kinds of things, and to literally go back and acknowledge the loss and then allow themselves, I mean, to let tears come up, to be a little angry about it, even to be frustrated about it at times. Those are all normal things. People go, yeah, but I want to do this thing so badly. And why am I frustrated that I'm doing it? Or, well, the frustration is the loss of, oh, I don't have that particular freedom. But now and then also to acknowledge what's coming, the positive of what's coming. Like, for instance, I lost the ability to go date anybody I wanted to go date because I'm moving in or marrying this person. But at the same time, what I'm also giving up is all the angst of wondering whether, I go on this, dating app and whether someone will even respond to me. I'm giving that up too. And so it's more of an acknowledgement and giving time and space to let yourself feel and express what needs to be felt and expressed about that.
As you were saying that, I was running various scenarios through the things historically where I've gone through change like that, good, both good and bad, mostly good. A couple of really fucked up bad things, but mostly good.
Right.
And I wonder, because I think journaling is a really good thing. I think journaling is a
great idea.
Right. It's a great thing. So what if you were to write a letter to that thing you are leaving?
You're right. That's a great idea. Writing a letter. So here's what you're actually talking about. That is to find some ritual or find some way to directly address what we're leaving. Like, and I don't know if anyone saw the Instagram post on the end of our class on the art of instinct and intuition in therapy and coaching. We actually we went out into the woods and people collected flowers and sticks and some tree branches and horseshoes and etc. And we built a bit of an altar or a symbol of, and each person spoke about what they were taking away and what they were leaving behind. So building in a celebration / ritual like you're talking about, it very well could be journaling. It very well could be a sit spot and taking your journal with you. It very well could be something that you do at the beginning or end of a meditation.
Is it so the term calling it into being?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yes.
kind of what we're doing.
I really like that term.
Yeah, we're
That's
calling it into being, right? And through that acknowledgement of it, that puts a button on it and goes, okay, closing that chapter. Pretty good with that.
Yeah, there's an acknowledgement. And I really like I did not think of that term. That's a great term, calling it into being. And don't be afraid to do that with a relationship. Like, for instance, and you and I've talked a lot. I mean, the fact of if I just say to you, yeah, this is great. In fact, we were talking about this a little bit earlier today. It's like, yeah, I've had the security of seeing X number of clients every week. And that's been something I've really, really enjoyed doing. And I still am going to see some clients, but it's going to be a different gig. But it's like sharing it with somebody that you care about, that cares about you, and that other person listening without judgment. It's like, yep, this is a big change. I get it. I understand. And so there's a lot of ways to call it into being. I really like that term.
It comes from a guy that I believe it's an Eastern thing, whether it's Buddhist or not. You would know better than I, but it was someone who talked. It was my partner at Wavefront, and it's like computer animation software for the masses did not exist until we called it into being.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so I feel like I've as a chef, I walk into a cold kitchen and I call lunch into being. It's like I don't know what that I'm going to create. It's about, I think for me it's a perfect thing about being a creator, a maker, right? Is calling things into being. I self-identify as that. It's someone who does that. I love the idea though of I think of it as if the visualization of my book of life is these various chapters, and that there are transitions between the chapters. It's almost like I tell a story about my decade, my 20s when I cooked, and then I have a almost a little chapterette in between going to software, and I talk about the things I missed about being in the kitchen. Exactly. As I moved in, as I was so excited to go into completely, I'd never worked in an office before. I didn't know anything about it. I just knew I wanted to make pictures on computers. It's all I knew I wanted to do. And there was all this other stuff that I had to learn how to do. But it's an interesting way. At least again, for me, if I can make these visual metaphors that help me understand those things. It's like when we do a talk, we teach storytelling. We have the what of the talk, the so what of the talk, and the now what of the talk. What are we talking about? What are the stakes? Now what do I need to do? But we actually, the higher order bit, as you know, is there's transitions in between those that let us go from one thing to another. And to your point, I think there's a transitional state where you acknowledge the grief of leaving the one thing. And you could probably even, as a part of that, think about what you're looking forward to in the other side of the change before, because you haven't gone through it yet. So you can say, I'm looking forward to these things. I'm leaving these and I'm going to these.
Yeah, the two things. I love what you're saying here. One is, I think writing a story about your change is a wonderful way to acknowledge what's happening in your grief about it. It's a wonderful way to do that. The biggest thing in doing that, and especially in the process of looking forward to what we're going to, is that we have to make sure that we don't use that looking forward to what we're going to as a way to bypass our grief.
Right. Yeah,
And
we do the one first until you we have this thing around here it's called spring cleaning. It was a therapeutic way to deal with overwhelm. And when you have so much going on, we'll say so what we do is Kimberly and I do this with one another. And so we could say, well, what do you have about grief on leaving this thing? Okay. And I would say it. Then she would say, what do you have about grief on leaving this thing? So she'll keep asking the question with no judgment or emotion or anything on her face. That's her job, is to be 1,000% neutral. And we'll do that until you have nothing left to say.
Right.
And that's what we were taught was called spring cleaning. Let's just get it all out. And it's to your point, it's once I've gotten all that out, I've acknowledged every single bit of that, I can take a deep breath, and it's shocking how effective that is.
Well, and in that, and this might be a good place to look at wrapping up this, is that in that spring cleaning, it's like, okay, we pulled it all out. What of that do you want to keep, and what of that do you want to let go of? And being able to allow ourselves to keep certain things actually helps us with providing a thread from what we're leaving to what we're coming to.
I love that. My friend, it's time to leave. What a great, this would, I could almost write about how we take a single idea and we just pull and pull and pull and pull and pull and come up with something that just, I hope is helpful to the people who are listening.
That's one of the magics of doing this show with you.
Yeah. Love you, my friend.
Love you too. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
I will.